Are you a writer whose mind is a whirlwind of creativity and distraction? Hello and welcome to Writing While Distracted, the podcast that helps you transform your scattered thoughts into literary brilliance. I'm your host, Brenda Murphy, your NeuroSpicy writing coach. For writers of all kinds, but particularly those dealing with distraction and mental health issues, on this podcast you'll hear writing tips for staying focused amidst the chaos of your mind, along with advice to help you find your story's beginning and use your strengths to get to the end of your novel. Here, creativity thrives in the midst of chaos. Stay tuned as we talk about structure in the revision process. Today's podcast covers the first part of the revision and editing process after you have completed your rough draft. I spoke about the steps for revising and editing your manuscript previously on the podcast, and I'll link to that episode in the show notes. It has in its show notes a checklist for the revision and editing process, and I will also include it in today's show notes, just so you have it. Revisions and editing, as I've said, are what I consider the fun part of writing. You're about to take your wobbly, messy first draft and shape it into something that resembles a novel. For a lot of people who struggle with distraction issues and executive function, crafting the structure of our novels is one of the most difficult parts of writing, because every scene has to have a beginning, a middle, and an end in order to tell a coherent story. And because we're NeuroSpicy, our stories often come out of our heads in an incoherent way. They make sense to us because our brains fill in the parts that don't make it to the paper. And so, as part of our revising our stories, we need to make sure that all of those little things that didn't make it to the page that are necessary to have our stories make sense actually get to the page. Often, people with distraction issues struggle with basic editing. Either we read fast, or we skip over what's not there, or we get distracted during reading and we miss that our story is incoherent to anyone who isn't us. In order to meet our storytelling conventions and create a novel that has a clear beginning, a middle, and an ending that makes sense, we need a simple way to look at our story overall, a helicopter view of our novel. And the best way that I've found to do this objectively is to create a reverse outline from your manuscript. Nothing else has been more succinct in explaining to me what is missing from my novel. Because when you're working from the novel draft itself, it becomes very apparent where you've missed a scene or you left out an entire part that's in your head but not on the page. To create a reverse outline, you work from your manuscript as it is, and you create a list of scenes for each chapter. And as with anything you're outlining, you can make it as brief or as detailed as you like. The minimal things that need to be in the outline for each scene are the setting. Where does the scene take place? Time. What time is it within your novel's time frame? Who is in the scene? Who are your characters? What are they doing? What point of view is the scene told from? And most importantly, what's the point of the scene? What occurs to move the story forward or show character? And I'll give you two examples. In the first one, your character is sitting alone at a bus stop, and they see someone hurrying for the bus, and the bus is on its way, and they're not sure if the person's going to make it. And when they get to the door of the bus, they won't get on. They stand half in and half on, making the driver wait for that person who is struggling to catch up to the bus. Now, even when the bus driver yells at them, they hold their ground, they hold the door, they wait for that person struggling to catch up to the bus. That shows you that person's character. It gives you an insight into what kind of person they are. So if that scene's in your novel, then you know it's a scene that goes towards character development, character arc, showing you who these people are. Now, let's take that scene a step further. And in this scene, your character's on the bus, and the person who's out of breath, who is running to catch the bus, is holding on to a bloody bundle of money. And your character, after this person wedges himself next to them on the bus with this bloody bundle of money, looks at your character, and they exchange a glance, and they slip your character some of this bloody money. Now, you're wondering, where is this plot going? That moves the plot along. It also shows you something about your character that you thought was a good guy, maybe, and now you're not sure. Is this a good guy? Is a bad guy? You don't know. So, those are two ways to look at a scene to show you structure in your novel. Moving the plot forward, showing you the character's character. Ideally, a scene will do both. You can combine those scenes instead of having them be two separate scenes, unless your second scene is from the point of view of the person carrying the bloody bundle of money. In that case, then you have to have two separate scenes, otherwise it's head hopping, or at least two separate paragraphs so that you know you've had a clear change of speaker and clear change of point of view. When you're finished with your outline, read back through it. It will become clear if you've left things out, or if you have scenes that don't move the story along or don't show character development, or if scenes can be combined. If you have a scene that doesn't meet those requirements, no matter how much you love it, it either needs to go or you need to work on it to add things to it that either move the plot along or show character. Whenever possible, have a scene do all the heavy lifting, and it will really tighten up your writing. If you can show character development and move your plot along in the same scene, that will make your novel flow and make things move along. The point of a reverse outline is that you should be able to read through it and understand a short, coherent version of your novel or your story. You can do this for short stories too. A reverse outline will also demonstrate if your chapter lengths are correct for the pacing of the story. If you have one chapter that is 16 scenes long and the other chapters are only 4 scenes long, or if you have a chapter that's 1 scene long, you might need to reconfigure those chapters to even out the pacing of the story. There's nothing wrong with a 1-scene chapter. In fact, that can be used as a very effective element if it's a very significant event and you want the reader to pause and really look at what just happened. So don't be afraid of having a very short chapter. Just make sure that your story flows in a coherent way and that the pacing makes sense for the story that you're telling. Think of a chapter as a break in the story for your readers to consider what has already occurred and what might happen next. If it's a very long scene or a pivotal scene and you want to set it apart, you can decide where your scenes are in your book. And so you might want to either lead a chapter off with a very significant scene or end a chapter with a very significant scene. You can also put it in the middle so that your chapter is pyramid shaped, where there's rising action, where the 2 scenes leading up to the main scene, and then 2 scenes dealing with the aftermath of the main scene, so that your writing is like a series of peaks and valleys. You have control here of how your story evolves and how readers experience your story. And I think structure and pacing is one of those things that a lot of writers don't necessarily pay attention to, but I think it's what sets writers apart. We've all had those books that we pick up and we can't stop turning the pages. And it doesn't matter that it's now 4 a.m. and we have to be up for work in 2 hours because the story was so compelling, you couldn't put it down. That's the author really paying attention to pacing of the story. You couldn't close the book because you were dying to find out what happens next. And that's what you get to do at this point with structure and revision, is figuring out the pacing so that your readers can't stop turning pages. The best thing about a reverse outline for those of us who struggle with executive function is it provides a very clear view of what is going on in our novel in a way that we can't necessarily see it when we're in our novel. It's like we've backed up and we're looking at it from above. It also is the time that if you notice your story is broken in that it doesn't make sense, or you need a few more scenes to build up a character's character arc, or maybe you need to cut scenes, like this scene doesn't even make any sense, let's get rid of it, or revise it. There's nothing wrong with fixing a broken scene. I have had instances where I've done my reverse outline and my story is so broken, I've actually gone back to my original 3x5 cards and resorted them. And in that case, resorted my story because I realized that it wasn't the story I wanted to tell, and it wasn't being told in the way that I wanted to tell it. So there's so many things you can gain from a reverse outline. If you're new to writing, I cannot overstate the value of doing a reverse outline. If you are a pantser or someone who works from a very loose outline, creating a reverse outline will really help you solidify your story's structure. So don't skip this part. It's my best advice and my number one tip for working on story structure, especially for NeuroSpicy folks. Now, we've talked about pacing, we've talked about character development. You're also looking at plot. Do the things in your story make sense? Do the changes that your character undergoes, do they make sense? Have you put in enough scenes that show why this character is behaving the way it is? Have you put in enough scenes that the plot makes sense? Have you left out things? If you're writing, particularly if you're writing mystery or a thriller, your plotting needs to be tight. Your readers want to solve the mystery. Your thriller readers want to stay ahead of the bad guy or know how you're going to catch the bad person in your novel. They want to know that your detective, your crime fighter, whoever it is on the right track to catch the big bad before something bad happens. And so they want that tension woven within the story. So structure is where you can really look at that, and structure and plot is now part of it. So the other part of your reverse outline is it will show you how your plot is moving along. The mantra of writers is always show, don't tell. And that can be the very hardest thing for new writers to grasp. Sandra Gareth, also known as Jay, has a fantastic book about showing versus telling in writing. And I recommend it if you're struggling to understand how to do it. I'll link it in the show notes so you can pick up a copy. You can also try and find it in your library. I haven't found it at my local library, but it might be at yours. Just take a moment and read this book. It is so helpful, especially if you're struggling to understand what folks mean when they say show, don't tell. And so many first-time novelists spend a lot of time telling you things instead of showing you things. And the showing is what hooks readers. They want to read about what happened. They don't want you to tell them what happened. That's secondhand knowledge. And it's not as exciting. Now, there are times where it's perfectly fine to tell, and other times where it's perfectly fine to show. Knowing the difference is what makes the difference between a good book and a great book. So pick up a copy of that Show Don't Tell and read it. It's very short. It won't take you a long time, but that will really help you understand what I'm trying to say and what other writing coaches are trying to say when we say, show us what's happening. Don't tell us what's happening. You can say, the rain came down like buckets from the sky. But if you show me your character getting drenched to the bone in the 4-minute walk to their car, I'm going to know how hard it was raining. Take some time to learn how to do that and understand what that is. Your character's journey also needs to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And this is part of your novel's structure. Some people may argue that if you're writing genre fiction and you're writing the same character over and over again, say you're writing a mystery series or an adventure series that features the same characters, that you don't have character growth and development. And I would argue that the best series do show you continued character growth and development over the course of the series. So no matter how long your series is, your character is still growing and evolving. And that's what brings readers back to your series. Not only do they want to see what adventure your character is going to have that time, they want to see how your character's evolving, what's going on in their lives. How are they changed? How have they changed since the events of the last book in the series? So those are things that also will become apparent as you look at your reverse outline. You're going to see your characters' scenes. You're going to see their behaviors written large and written simply so you can see what's going on with them. Even if your character changes in only small ways over the course of a series, it makes the series much more entertaining and much more readable. As much as we appreciate comfort characters, those characters who are always the same and familiar, As a reader, you want to see how those characters are going to behave in a new set of circumstances. I would submit having your character change, even in small ways, over the course of your series is going to make your books much more entertaining and much more readable. As much as we appreciate characters who are always the same, there is some comfort in familiarity and knowing a character. As a reader, we can't wait to see how they will behave in a new story, in a new setting, with a new challenge. And stories that bring that same character but have them change over the course of the series are infinitely more readable and addicting. And that's just my opinion, and your mileage may vary. But if you have an opportunity to have your character change over the course of your story, do it. If you're writing a standalone book, character arcs are the heart of your story. Even if you feel like your story is plot-driven, making sure that you have appropriate scenes to show the development of your characters and their internal and external struggles is a vital part of story structure and compelling storytelling. I talked about pre-writing in a previous episode of the podcast and how important it is to build a solid foundation for your story, and I'll link to that podcast in the show notes. If you're unsure about how your character would behave in a scene, go back to your pre-writing and your character worksheets and compare them with your reverse outline. Has your character changed? And at what cost? This is what brings people back to your books. Even if it's a plot-heavy book, your plot is still made up of characters' actions. Make sure you have scenes that demonstrate what they have to sacrifice to attain their goals. Sacrifice drives story, whether it's an internal sacrifice, such as giving up or modifying their self-image, or an external sacrifice, such as foregoing monetary rewards by not developing land down by the marsh the character had planned to build luxury condos on, that their love interest is working hard to protect as a nature preserve for waterfowl. Character growth and development draws readers in, and this is the point in the revision process where you fix any issues and tweak scenes to demonstrate those changes and plot points that are key to understanding your story. This is when you fix all the broken issues in your story. So take your time here, especially if, like me, you work from a loose outline and write a discovery draft. If you're a pantser and don't work from an outline, you need to make sure you've developed the story and character arcs in a way that makes sense and that your characters stay in character. Nothing is worse than reading a book and all of a sudden there's some wacky change in a character. If you're like me, you raise an eyebrow and say sometimes out loud, "What the heck? Why would she do that?" Sometimes several chapters later, some bit of character history comes to light that explains why the characters behaved the way they did. But in the worst case, the reader's left wondering, did I miss something? Which doesn't lead to an enjoyable reading experience. It can lead to folks not finishing your story because as an author, you've lost them by having your character behave out of character without an explanation. It's your opportunity in revisions to fix any major issues with your novel. Because if you have to fix problems later, when you get your copy edits back from your editor or your beta reader, and they have a comment, "What the heck, why did she do this?" It's going to take a lot more work at that point in the book writing process versus taking the time to restructure and add in scenes to make your character's behavior and your story make sense. Another tool that you can use for examining your structure is to listen to your book. There are ways you can have Microsoft Word or other word processing programs read your work back to you. If you're someone who works better with audio processing or needs a different method of work for whatever reason, listening to your story and making notes of what needs to be corrected in your scenes can be a very enlightening way to work. I usually listen to my work either reading it out loud or having my word processor read my story to me when I'm working on dialogue. But you can also use that method for creating your reverse outline. Use whatever way works for you. Many NeuroSpicy folks become overwhelmed and disheartened during the revision process. They remember the struggle it was to complete the manuscript. They look at all the work they've done and can't imagine doing more. Take the same approach to revising a novel as you did when writing it. Be consistent about the time you spend. Focus on one project until you get it done, and don't quit. When you run across things that don't make sense, where you've got things out of order or jumbled, don't be discouraged, make notes, and then change it. Nothing is set in stone at this point. It's all a malleable pile of clay that you are shaping into the story that you want to tell. For folks with distraction issues and people with poor executive function, this will be the hardest part of your writing process, and I know this from experience. This is the part where I struggle. Organizing my thoughts and my words in a correct and orderly fashion is excruciating at times. And I'm going to tell you the best thing that you can do for yourself is to take your time, work in short periods, and to be kind to yourself. Take the time to create a reverse outline. It will make your efforts so much easier because you will have your story laid out in front of you and you will know where you're going with the story, why you wrote the scenes that you did, and what you were trying to say. And if you question why you had your character behave in a certain way, go back and reread your pre-writing. Read your character worksheets. Look at whatever notes you made about your characters until you figure it out. This is the point where you can also ask friends for assistance. If you have a scene that's not working and you can't understand what's broken in it, ask a friend to read just that scene. That can be so helpful because sometimes we're so close to our work, we can't see what's working, but we know inside of us, we have an internal monitor that says, nope, that scene's wrong and you need to fix it. And the other part of you says, well, what's wrong with it? And they're like, I don't know, it's just wrong. So take advantage of your friends that can help you here. And again, this works for character-driven stories and plot-driven stories. It's all about people. People are the heart of your story. If you are writing genre fiction, this is the time to make sure you're meeting genre expectations. If you're writing a mystery, make sure you have the clues scattered in your novel so readers can solve the crime. If you're writing a thriller, make sure you're maintaining tension throughout the story. And if you're writing a romance, be sure your scenes convince your reader that those are the only people on earth that belong together as a couple, no matter what, or a throuple, depending on what you're writing. So if you're at the starting line with revising and editing your novel, overwhelmed and freaking out, or if you've been revising and feel stuck, please try creating a reverse outline by hand, or listen to your draft and create an outline that way, paying attention to your structure and character development. Once your structure is nailed down, you can go back and do what I call window dressing, where you work on word choice and description and dialogue. But that's going to be the subject of a future podcast. Until then, keep writing. Thanks for tuning in to Writing While Distracted, where we navigate the winding roads of creativity amidst the chaos of distraction. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe. Leave a rating and review. It really helps get the podcast in front of more folks. Remember, in the dance between focus and division, every stumble is a step closer to mastering the art of writing. Join us next time as we continue to unravel the mysteries of the writer's mind. Until then, keep writing, keep wandering, and embrace the distractions that fuel your creativity. Stay tuned, stay inspired.